Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Mike Cohen from ISMP, as you heard. Glad to be doing these programs. I hope to be able to do them from time to time. As you know, in the States, we have a reporting program, and we have a memorandum of understanding with our FDA, where everything that comes into our program, we share with the FDA. We redact the identity so that if FDA wants to get in touch or ask questions from anyone that's reported, we get in touch with the reporter and ask their permission, and we do follow up. And then we meet regularly with the FDA. Once a month, we go over regulated product errors. And as we probably told you in the past, we also affect practice issues, not only through interaction here in the States. We have accrediting organizations like the Joint Commission, and also our federal government for patients that are over 65, called Medicare. They have conditions of participation, and some of them outline medication safety requirements. So we also affect or can affect those requirements. And then, of course, we also work with the safety committees at hospitals, the pharmacy and therapeutics committees that read our newsletters. We publish every 2 weeks, and we've been doing that for 27 years now. And I'm proud to say we've never missed an issue. And it's all based on providers, practitioners getting in touch with us when they have a medication error. And we always promise, and we've stuck to this for more than 27 years, it actually started as a journal column, that we will never identify them publicly. We always hold that in strict confidence, and it's worked very well that way. So we publish these, as I said, every 2 weeks. They go to all the hospitals in the country. We have other newsletters that hit other sites like community pharmacies, long-term care facilities. We have a newsletter for consumers, and we have another newsletter for nurses. And on a regular basis with the acute care, from which a lot of the other newsletter publications are derived, we also publish a regular quarterly, what we call action agenda. And what we've noticed is that, through our interactions, I'm also chair of the International Medication Safety Network. And as a matter of fact, I've spoken to you before many times now on behalf of the International Medication Safety Network. And Jill and Marissa have joined me in those presentations. I guess most recently, we did the one on the medication safety officer for your group. But I've noticed that many of the reports that we have in the United States really do have international implications. And so I interacted with Brian and Alan, and Keshan really been helpful the last few weeks with doing this presentation. And I wanted to cover some of the issues that I think do have international implications even today, or will in the near future. And so let me get started. I did want to mention that we actually publish in our newsletter every 3 months. And this is the first quarter. We're up to the second quarter. And for this presentation, I actually included information from January until the present, until our newsletter from week before last. We have another one going out this week. And we list all of these for the people that read these newsletters. And it kind of summarizes the major topics, what the problems were and what our recommendations were. And they received this as a Word file, a Microsoft Word file, as well as a PDF document. And so the Word file, they can literally type in what their assessment of the problem is, whether they think they have this issue, and then also make an assignment and even develop a timeline for addressing the issue. So that it isn't just that we're collecting information, for a big, gigantic database. We really want people to look and see what has happened in other organizations besides their own. In many cases, these are not real common. they may happen 1 out of every 1 million doses of drug or whatever that number might be. But we still want organizations to prepare for it. No one wants to see a patient get hurt. And if you're giving, 100 million doses of the drug, it's going to happen frequently enough that it could happen at your organization. So that's kind of become part of the culture here in the United States, and part of what we promote to improve medication safety. It's not just looking at data. It's not just looking at, how many drugs were given at the wrong time in the wrong dose to the wrong patient. We get to the actual stories, and we make recommendations. Whereas, at least once a month or every other month, an organization could take a look at these and say, do we need to be doing something in our organization? Do we use that medication? Is this how we use it? Maybe we need to make changes. So that's the point of what we do. And I wanted to share some of that because, like I said, much of this is related to things that happen internationally. So one of the issues I'll start off with that we published during the past 6 months, and this was in January. We usually start out in January each year with what we call a top 10 list. This was in our January 28th issue, and there were several items here that I have in yellow that I believe do have international implications. So the first one, of course, is and I'm not going to go into these in detail as I will the remaining topics, but I will say that this is a nationwide problem or a worldwide problem, and that is inappropriate use of extended release opioids. And I'm talking here, for example, about transdermal opioid products like transdermal fentanyl. It is one of the highest rates of medication that involves opioids, and of the opioids, we probably have more problems with fentanyl over the years, probably doing a little bit better than we had when these first became available many, many years ago, over 20 years ago. The main issues are beginning dosing in patients that are not opioid tolerant, that haven't already been on opioids. And in our product labeling, we define what opioid tolerant is. And I won't go into that now, but it is in the package insert. And unfortunately, we see this used for acute pain now and then. And we also see problems with people not removing the patches, wearing multiple patches at a time, people starting off with doses that are way too high. We have multiple doses beginning at 12.5 microgram per hour. We call it 12 because we've had 12.5 confused with 125. So we dropped the 0.5 and just call it fentanyl 12. We have 25, 50, 75, and 100. And unfortunately, we've had people start off with 50 microgram per hour or even 75 for pain. Furthermore, it takes a couple of days to get blood levels, so it's not really suitable for acute pain in patients that aren't already receiving opioids and haven't already been using this patch for a while. So anyway, that's one. We have, and I'm going to go into this next one, COVID-19 vaccine errors. We paid a lot of attention to this particular issue in the United States. And by the way, if you aren't involved with or if you don't have somebody in your organization that might be interested in or has been attending, the International Medication Safety Network has a COVID-19 special interest group that you could join. Just go to the IntMedSafe, IntMedSafe.net website, intmedsafe.net website, and you'll see an entry right there on the homepage that you can click on and become a member. There's no charge or anything. You can become a member of the special interest group on COVID vaccines. We've had 4 meetings so far, and all of them have been terrific and very well attended. We have a number of regulators that are participating in that and have even made presentations for us. So COVID vaccine errors, I want to talk about in a minute. Another one, which you may not even think about, this is a problem generally worldwide, that especially during COVID, our nurses have been so busy, taxed with the responsibility of caring for so many patients with COVID-19, and not even just in the critical care units. We're seeing them in outpatient, we're seeing them in inpatient areas as well. That unfortunately, adding to that, they're responsible for preparing much of the injectable medication right there on the nursing unit. And unfortunately, there are errors that happen with these injectable drugs, and there are compromises to sterility that happen up on a nursing unit. And one of the things that we've really pushed for here in the United States and in some other countries as well, and some regions, is more support from the pharmacy and the pharmaceutical industry in the form of ready to administer medications like pre-filled syringes, pre-mixed IV syringe solutions in IV bags with drugs already available and mixed so that the nurses don't have to do that. And also, we've already been pretty good about parenteral nutrition made by the pharmacy and some other complicated solutions, but more and more, we're interested in seeing support from the pharmacy for the nurses that previously had to mix these medications by themselves. And I think one of the problems has been that we don't recognize how serious this problem is. There haven't really been enough studies to show that medication errors are considerably frequent, and some of them are serious, and we don't even recognize that, and they don't get reported. They don't have a reporting system in many regions of the world. So it is an area of focus for us, and it is an area of focus for some of the companies as well, and also for our International Medication Safety Network, where we have been looking at a possible study that could be done with the support of people from these countries to get the cost considerations out there, not just the patient safety considerations. So I think you're going to see that more and more over the coming year or years. And then finally, of one of the top 10s, and I believe I did mention this to the group, I believe we did talk about this before. We've had a major problem in this world with an antifibrinolytic agent, injectable, called tranexamic acid, that's used for bleeding in various ways. And it's also available in other dosage forms besides injections, but unfortunately, this is used in ways that are inappropriate. And they're mixed up sometimes with other drugs, like local anesthetics, like bupivacaine. And in the United States, we had a pretty serious packaging problem where these vials look very, very similar. And we would have people accidentally inject tranexamic acid instead of bupivacaine for regional anesthesia. And some of these cases resulted in death. We also had bupivacaine, which is one of the local anesthetics, given intravenously instead of tranexamic acid. And bupivacaine, as a local anesthetic, is an irritant to the myocardium. And so there have been incidents where patients went into cardiac arrest. So a few times over the past year and years, we've been warning about the need to take a look at these products. And our FDA has even included a new warning on the labeling of these products, right on the labeling. We're going to begin to see that in the near future. But beyond that, we want people to look at how they're storing these drugs, where they're used, again, a lot in obstetrics, a lot in perioperative areas where these injectables are commonly used, and make sure that you don't have products from manufacturers that, make these look very, very similar. So I've showed pictures of these before in the past, and I just wanted to list what the top 10 were that I think have international implications. And we do have more information and photographs for each of these at this link that goes to the actual article on our website. That's available. We do have asked people to sign up, if you haven't been to our website before, to sign up for the first time with a to get a password or create a password. And then from then on, you don't need to do that anymore. And the material is free. So I did want to talk about these COVID vaccine errors. We've actually had 3 publications this year where we have described errors with COVID vaccines. And this is the first slide, and then I'm going to talk about prevention measures very quickly. One of the main problems that we've run into, and keep in mind that many of the vaccinations are given during mass vaccination programs, either by public health departments created by our various states or cities, or by hospitals in some case. So it's not unusual to see large numbers of patients and large numbers of doses given. And one of the issues that we've run into is dilution errors. We have one of the vaccines, which is the Pfizer-BioNTech, which many of you are using in your countries or used around the world, that does require reconstitution. We have to first thaw a frozen product, and then when that is thawed, we have to add a diluent of 0.9% sodium chloride injection, and that requires a volume for the vial size that we have of 1.8 milliliter. So the problem is, unfortunately, the first thing is we've been using sterile water for injection instead of 0.9%. That creates a vaccination that is not effective, and you would have to redose people if that problem is recognized. And then, believe it or not, we have had a number of cases where the syringes themselves are prepared in advance, and you open the paper packaging for a number of these syringes, and you lay them out on the table, and then usually a nurse will pull the plunger back to 1.8 ml, which would be the amount of air that will be injected into the sodium chloride injection vial to equilibrate the pressure internally in the vial. Put in 1.8 ml of air, withdraw 1.8 ml of fluid, and then reconstitute the vaccine. Unfortunately, we have had many cases where that 1.8 ml syringe was used by itself to inject the patient. Believe it or not, we've had a number of cases that have reached the media. It gets mixed up with syringes where that actual volume is located, and then they inject the concentrated vaccine into the patient, which is an overdose because the product hasn't been diluted. And so we've had recommendations out there, and I can almost guarantee that this will happen if you're using the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. We have had that happen quite often, actually. The other issue is with 2-component vaccines, the wrong diluent given, as I mentioned, sterile water, but it is also possible if these are stored in a refrigerator for another drug to be given instead as the diluent, where it gets mixed up with the vaccine. And we haven't had any cases reported, but typically this might be insulin, which is also stored in a refrigerator, or it could be another drug. So we have really emphasized the need to carefully store the concentrated vaccine and the diluents apart from one another in the refrigerator during storage so that they're not confused with one another. Then we've had air injected into the vial instead of diluent. That's another problem. So that syringe that was left on the table was injected into the vial instead of the diluent vial withdrawn. And unfortunately, again, the vaccine isn't properly diluted. Storage issues I just mentioned. A lot of the vaccines that we give, we have the Johnson & Johnson is a 1-dose vaccine, as many of you know, but the Moderna and the Pfizer-BioNTech are 2 doses each. And we give the first vaccine, we give the patient a card to remind them what day to come back for a second dose. They come back, they forget the card, and somebody, they may say, I got the Moderna and they actually got the Pfizer. So we've had a lot of issues with giving a different vaccine the second time around at 21 days or 28 days. So that's another issue that we've had, and we've made recommendations on that. A lot of administration to the wrong age group. Now, we have just extended the age range for the Pfizer BioNTech. It used to be 16 and greater, and now FDA has given approval in the emergency use authorization for ages 12 through 15. And Moderna just recently submitted information to extend the range of the vaccine dosing as well. So we'll see that. A waste of vaccine, that's not as much of a problem as we used to have here in the States. We have been very, very fortunate that we have the 3 different vaccines, and now we just saw data submitted for a 4th vaccine that's looking pretty good. So we don't have the vaccine shortage that we had at one time. And, you know, like many of the countries at the G7, we've begun to even contribute the vaccines to other countries. So it isn't a problem that we once had, but it was a problem at one time. We were able to give at least 6 doses of vaccine out of the Pfizer BioNTech vial, and people didn't realize that at first. So they would leave some of this vaccine, enough for a 6th dose in the vial. Same with the Moderna, we were able to give 11 doses. Now we've even created new packaging sizes for the Moderna. We have a 15-dose vial, and the 11-dose or 10-dose is now going away. We've had errors in scheduling the 2nd dose where people don't come back in time. We've also had problems with lookalike vials. I want to show you that in a minute. And one of the big problems that we have, because it is sometimes a serious injury, is shoulder injury related to vaccine administration, or SIRVA, as we call it. Preventing errors with COVID vaccine, verifying the competency of preparers and vaccinators. We've had non-nursing, non-physicians who give vaccines. We've had ophthalmologists, we've had podiatrists that it may be in their scope of practice, but they really were never trained to give vaccines. And there's where we see some of the SIRVA, the shoulder injuries related to vaccine administration. Dispensing pharmacy prepared and labeled syringes whenever possible. We are able to do that. We have a whole army of pharmacists that have been trained to give vaccines and to prepare them safely. For mass vaccination, using a standard organized process with independent double checks. As I said before, maximizing doses withdrawn from vials. We had a mix-up between monoclonal antibodies and vaccines, and I'm going to show you in just a second. Separating vaccines in storage, planning for leftover vaccines, being prepared for allergic reactions with epinephrine. 1 in a million patients will have an anaphylactic reaction, but you need to be prepared, and that has some implications that I want to talk about briefly. And then reporting vaccine adverse events is required by our government. Our vaccines are free for all patients, but the healthcare providers have to submit any adverse event. That could be an allergy, it could be anything that you learn about, has to be reported to the government through the vaccine adverse event reporting system. And voluntarily, we ask the people also report to ISMP, and that's how we get a lot of our information, which we also turn over to FDA and the vaccine adverse event reporting system. And then finally, we have a network of immunization information systems that you can access, and not only can access, you must access to document what vaccine the patient has had. And it could be all vaccines that the patient, not just COVID vaccines, so that you would be able to even check before you give a vaccine to see what vaccine they may have had before. And then you document it after. That's a requirement. So we did have this mix up with Regeneron's monoclonal antibody pair, casirivimab and indevimab. And I just want to show, just so you see, you know, these are essentially, these at the time, when we had this mix-up, we had about 40 patients get injected with monoclonal antibody vial, casirivimab, instead of COVID vaccine. And I'll show you why in a second. but some of the labeling did not have the labeling did not have the drug names on them. It had a license plate name. And what you see there, pharmacies began preparing a label with a barcode on it. Those barcodes in the little square there on the vial label were not really functional. They were there on a temporary basis. And you could see in some cases, the vials look very similar. When we had this accident, it was actually with a larger vaccine vial of casirivimab. But this is the vaccine vial, and this is the monoclonal antibody vial. And we had a courier that was sent by a hospital to a place where they had an inventory of Moderna vaccine. And when they got there, they had a lot of the monoclonal antibodies actually out on the table, and the names of the drugs were not on the label. And they confused these with the vaccine. They brought them back to the facility, and they began to draw up the Regeneron monoclonal antibody, casirivimab, and injecting them intramuscularly into the patient instead of an actual vaccine. That made the media. Our FDA and company worked very quickly and relabeled the product, and they put the names of the antibodies on the product. And now we even have a co-formulation where they've combined both products in a single vial, and they have a brand name now, Regen Cove. So that's what's taken place here. There's another monoclonal antibody by Lilly, which has, again, 2 monoclonals that have to be mixed in an IV bag and administered intravenously. And the dose requires 2 doses of etesivimab and 1 dose of bamlanivimab. Unfortunately, these are packaged by themselves. They're not packaged in a kit with 2 and 1. And we've had just the opposite, where 2 vials of bamlanivimab were given and 1 vial of etesivimab. So that's another problem that we have. And I think the company is working on a kit. I don't know where they are with that, but hopefully that's either out on the market right now or will be very shortly. Then I wanted to tell you about one other thing. We've had a few mix-ups now. I told you just a few minutes ago about the need to have adrenaline or epinephrine readily available in case of an anaphylactic reaction. You can see that these vials can look very, very similar. They both have these purple caps. One is the, on the right, of course, is the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID vaccine. On the left is the adrenaline vial. And we actually had an incident where 3 people were injected with epinephrine instead of the vaccine when these were drawn up into a syringe and labeled and laid on a table not far from one another. We haven't, as far as we know, had any mix-ups of these actual vials, but we did put out a warning. And, you know, we wanted people to make sure that the adrenaline is readily available, but not stored near any of the vaccine product whatsoever. Now, these may look different in your situation. If you wanted to, you could look into it if you use any of the vaccines to make sure that the adrenaline vials don't look the same. These patients are not going to be harmed too badly. They will get an increase in heart rate, you know, an increase in blood pressure, but not much beyond that. I mentioned shoulder injury, the vaccine administration. We do continue to get these reports. Some of them are very serious. It's a situation where the person that's giving the vaccine does not properly measure 3 finger breadths below the acromion, which is the proper location of the deltoid muscle for an IM injection. And unfortunately, they inject it near the acromion. They hit a bursa, or unfortunately, you know, you could hit a ligament and tear it. And we have had some serious injuries that have even required surgery. So again, it's in the training to make sure that people, you know, who want to do well, they want to volunteer, but they really have never been properly trained about how to give IM injections. So you certainly want to make sure that vaccinators understand the proper technique. And I don't, you know, I'm not saying that you could do that personally, but there's a lot of good information out there. It wouldn't be a bad idea if you have the ability to communicate with your constituency. This information is on our website. It's on other expert organization websites. Here in the United States, we have the Immunization Action Coalition, where this information is available for free and should be shared. And then we have just had a meeting that I wanted to let everyone know about investigational drugs. This is an international problem. It was a public meeting that was held by FDA, but we invited other countries to participate. We had other countries speaking at this meeting. It was just 2 weeks ago. There are a lot of problems with the labeling of investigational drugs where there's no label at all. In some cases, not even on the immediate container, or we don't have the drug names, even though there might have been an INN available for over a year. The drug names continue to have a license plate, you know, like ABC-12345, instead of the available INN that's never been printed, and that can start in phase 1 and go all the way through phase 3, you know, of the research process. So that's a big problem. We talked about all these that you see there on the slide, naked cartons, unlabeled products, missing formulations. We had some where the protocols would give one strength and the bottles that came with the protocol had another strength. Unsafe abbreviations that weren't understood. Not having unit dose packaging. So for the study, the dispensing pharmacist in charge of investigational drugs had to send out the bulk bottle, which is never something that you want to do. You'd much rather have unit dose packaging, but they weren't able to do that. They didn't have good stability information, for example. The labeling was so crowded on many of the containers. Multiple languages, because they're international. We talked about all these, as well as the color and the shape of the placebo and other tablet sizes and capsules, et cetera. And everyone agreed that action needs to be taken. We had drug companies involved, AbbVie and Merck were involved. FDA had panels where they spoke. I was involved with one of the panels where we had the providers that listed all the problems and showed examples. All this information, we plan to write about it in our newsletter shortly, so you'll be getting a copy of that, those of you that have signed up for the newsletter. And it will also be available on the, you know, there'll be public information that'll be available on the sponsor. It was the Reagan-Udall Foundation working with FDA. So all that will be available, and I hope you'll find it useful. Just a couple of other things before we leave off. I don't know where you are with your process of requiring barcodes in your country. I know not too many countries are doing that. We've been doing it now for a few years. I know in many areas of the world, they do their own labeling, like in the Middle East, because they have to import drugs and there is no barcode on a lot of them, unfortunately. We're hoping to move more and more towards barcoding as a way to prevent medication errors, where you could, relatively inexpensive software and equipment could assure that patients are getting the proper drug in the proper container. But I wanted to just show you this so you can keep it in mind. We've had several companies that are making these barcodes available on round containers without realizing that the pharmacists in the pharmacy and nurses at the bedside cannot scan barcodes on a round container. So they have to redo the labeling and make it vertical on the side of the container because the laser cannot properly capture a barcode. And these are several products, most recently the cisatracurium product, that have to go back to the manufacturer and they have to relabel it at some cost, by the way. So keep that in mind. I just wanted to show you that. And I'm going to end it here because we have a time sequence here that's getting a little bit long. I don't even know if you realize this, if you have any control in the future or you can communicate with the regulator that you work with. But these pre-filled syringes that I spoke about, that I hope to see more and more of, in this case, penicillin G benzathine, which is used for sexually transmitted disease, in particular syphilis. Did you know that not just this, drug, but many drugs, the labels are on upside down for about 80 to 85% of the people that have to read them, the right-handed individuals. They label it for a left-hander. And literally the right-hander will have to somehow turn this upside down in order to read the label and read the warnings. And I don't think they're going to do that. So it's an unsafe way of labeling. And I wanted to bring that to your attention. Also, we have sometimes seen negative warnings like not for injection. And unfortunately, sometimes they don't see the word not, and it looks like it says for injection intravenously when it really was meant to say not for injection intravenously. So we have given to not including negative warnings. And as you can see, the syringe on the bottom, which is not supposed to be given intravenously because it's a thick suspension, penicillin G benzathine, it says warning, fatal if given by other routes, and it's in red print. So that's how we now label these products after gaining some experience with people actually injecting this, confusing it with propofol or some other white, milky, lipid-based solution. So I wanted to let you know about that. Anyway, I'm going to end it right there. I don't know if there's any questions, but I'll stop right there. Right?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. Fascinating and really useful, up-to-date information for all our members. We do have some time for some questions.
Oh, okay.
We will also probably at our next routine group call discuss how best to get these ISMP updates for process. But we thought we'd do it today because there's, as you say, some really hot topics that you've brought to our attention. We would like to share some images of you because we have our social media account, and Angela will arrange that if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
So, okay, so she would like to do that. I see there's some chat, anything particular? Just to say, there is a group here in Manchester looking more intensively at the intravenous infusion topic you mentioned. So I just thought I'd flag that up with you, can give you more information. They may well be having some further meetings on that. I just we ought to bring that to you, ISMP's attention. There was a report last year that came out.
Yeah, it's been going on for a long, long time that we throw everything on the nurses, you know.
Yeah.
And expect them to be perfect, and they can't.
Secondly, we are in discussion with GS1, the barcode people, and I think Peshan, we're planning a presentation from them later this year, isn't that right?
That's correct, Brian.
So I think you've raised some interesting points, and we will pass that on to GS1 so they can also comment on how they will help, because this isn't just, as you know, they deal with society. So they may have experience from other sectors, how they've dealt with the barcode issues you've raised, okay? So that's very helpful. And I think GS1 is an organization we should have much stronger links with in pharmacovigilance for the reasons you just highlighted. So thank you for that. Sure. Any further comments from anybody?
Brian, I have a question, if you allow me. This is Tamer.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mike. This is very, very informative presentation as usual. And I would love to really have the slides because some of this information will be very helpful. So actually I have two-part question, Mike. The first one, you mentioned it, and there is a lot of debate here in the region, actually, when we talk about the Middle East, which is the interchangeably using the second dose from different vaccine in COVID-19. I heard you say this is something, as I understand, I wanted to clarify this, that should not be done. However, I believe some countries in Europe, they started this practice. I'm not 100% sure, but I heard something like this. So this is one, this is the first question. Second question, what about the use of the vaccine in pregnancy? I know there is a study, but it's for a short period of time. And again, countries, they started to use this vaccine and pregnancy based on this study, I think, published in the New England. So what do you think? Because I know the safety, one of the major points is the pregnancy. So this
I'm
is
sorry, I didn't get what you were saying on the second one. I'm sorry. I started.
which is the use of vaccine in pregnancy, in pregnant women.
The use of
So-
vaccines,
COVID-19 vaccine.
COVID-19
as-
vaccines.
Yeah. Is it safe to be used in women, in pregnant women, or should be waiting until more data? Is that clear?
Well, the first one, we do know that, there is some research being done about, if the second vaccine is a different one from the first one. I think the reason that hasn't been recommended is they didn't have enough data to, to recommend that or say that it's okay. But I don't think they give another dose either. So, that answers your first one. We just don't know enough. That's why it hasn't been recommended here.
Okay.
And
What about
I'm
the other
sorry,
one?
I still did not.
Okay. Let me ask directly. Do you recommend to use the COVID-19 vaccine in a pregnant woman?
I'm so sorry. I'm just not getting those
Okay.
last few words.
Yeah, Samir, to be fair on Mike, as you know, he's not with CDC or FDA, so he's really
Okay,
not in a
gotcha.
position to comment
No,
on
I'm
that.
talking
But
just
you have
safety
raised,
point.
Samir, you have raised a very important point from a medication error point of view, and of course, because too many, as you know, SPCs are silent on use in pregnancy, and when does use in pregnancy become a medication error? It's a very sensitive subject, and of course it has now been flagged up because of the COVID vaccine issue. So from ISMP point of view, I'm not sure what the labeling status is in the US, but if it's COVID vaccine is administered in pregnancy, are we going to call this an error?
Yeah, I do remember they did not restrict it in pregnancy. They did
No,
allow administration of pregnancy in the instructions in the EUA.
but it may vary across the world. But it
Yes.
is an important point, Thamir, and yes, we should always bear that in mind, that yes, you may have regulations say one thing, but the immunization authorities may come up with different recommendations for public health reasons.
Sure.
And I think each country has to make their own judgment.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
And if I may, the media might say another thing.
Yeah,
A number
that's
of
another.
times, at least here in Italy, we say we can hear every other day that they say patients over 60 should only take a certain vaccine. Then they say the younger should not take that vaccine. The other day they say also the opposite. So the question is, did you ever find out how much these kind of mistakes can be caused by infodemia and also by all of the contradictory information that everyone receives every day from the media?
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Giovanni. We will have to bring the discussion to a close. Thank you for your questions. Peshan, could you just quickly return to the agenda? So thank you, Mike, very much for your presentation.
My pleasure.
Very
Look forward to
welcome.
next time.
And
Thank
I'm
you.
sure that it's part of the continuing relationship.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.